Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined by Lawrence Conley and Brian Degning for the Tuesday Bulletin. Welcome back to the show, guys. Loads to discuss. Big game tonight. Talking point around Billy Gilmour. Lawrence is choking to get stuck into that debate. But let's start off with some of the moves, the movers and the shakers around Celtic Park at the moment. Brian, I watched with interest yesterday. Watched Leigh Griffiths getting interviewed outside Hampden. Had he been in the right condition this season, I'm pretty sure he'd have been part of the team tonight. And Scotland certainly need a striker. But I found it interesting that he was actually being interviewed, because Celtic are normally very controlling of media duties. Unfortunately, he didn't mention his Celtic career, but it did ask me the question whether or not he's going to be part of this rebuild under Ange, following the news that Anthony Ralston is going to be kept on for another year. We're taking up the 1 year option on his contract. What's your thoughts on that, first and foremost? Is it a sticking plaster until we get proper reinforcements in? We know that we are interested in other players, and in particular, I was looking with interest at Valentin Rossier as well, who apparently we've put in an official bid for. So what do you make of this? Is this something that we're reading a lot into, when in actual fact he's maybe just second, possibly even third choice for next season?
I think the thing that flags up for me, it's not as much that the boys signed, it's who's made the decision to offer him the contract extension. That's my concern. So I've said a few times on here and on Twitter, I don't really have any problem having some squad players in that maybe with no intention of using. We talked about Sviatchenko, we talked about other players maybe coming in, players that maybe are their first choices but are going to fill a gap. So I don't really have any issue with Ralston getting a contract. I don't think it's particularly great. I don't think it's particularly bad. I think he was probably better than Kenny, but I don't see a huge future for him. My immediate concern is who's making that decision. So I've been kind of pretty positive about Postecoglou not being a yes man and doing these things his own way. And, I'm kind of going on with that narrative. But I don't see how he could have watched him training virtually for 2 or 3 days and immediately phoned Dom and said, Dom, I've seen this boy training, he's exceptional, get him a contract. I don't see that work. He's not even met him yet. He doesn't meet him until Thursday, I think. So who's made the decision to give him a contract? Is it this mystery director of football that nobody knows exists? Is it still Peter Law? I mean, who's making these calls? That's a huge red flag for me. Some of the players that signed it, I know we signed the young boy, he's somebody for the academy, maybe someone else is in charge of that. It looked shocking. He was already a Neil Lennon signing. He was kind of already in the building. But to give out contracts to players, new players confuses me, especially when the manager's not met them yet. And that is a real worry, is who's making these decisions behind the scenes and why are they making them? And that's been a red flag for me in the past couple of days.
Absolutely, Brian. The player you mentioned, Joey Dawson, comes in from Scunthorpe. You kind of understand that, there are tiers to the operation, and if we're bringing someone in at 18 years of age as a project for someone who is definitely going to be involved in the Colts, and we'll come back to him later on, that's fine. That almost flies under the radar, although it was announced during the week. But when you're talking about deals for first team players, like him or loathe him, first team players like Anthony Ralston and others, and the other one I would throw into the mix there is Olivier Ntcham. Now, I think most Celtic fans will be quite happy when Olivier Ntcham leaves the building, but who is making that decision? And this is the concern that has been raised all over social media. I've seen it myself, Brian, and it's people are asking the question, if we're giving deals to the likes of Ralston, potentially Griffiths, when he meets up with Postecoglou on Wednesday, who's making the decisions? Because at this moment in time, we believe that the CEO, the outgoing CEO, has had his leaving party. Dominic Mackay is in the building, although officially it doesn't start until the 1st of July. He's in the building. We don't have the mythical director of football. We obviously heard last week the name Gordon Strachan being linked with that particular position. So it seems to me as though the club, Lawrence, is in a state of flux. Or does that just come down once again to the fact that we're not being told a great deal at this moment in time? So it just appears as though there are gaping holes in the operation at the moment.
Well, we've definitely not been told much. Communication, PR, whatever you call it. But we just know what's going on. Are we still looking for a director of football? Are we not? Who knows? So, part of it's that, but I think Guy's right, you're a bit worried. What's Ange going on about Ralston? They'll seen all his fitness data and all his videos, but he's never really going to have seen him in the flesh until recently. We talked off air, you raised the fact they've got 2 squads to fill, but a lot of us are dubious about the first team squad, never mind filling a Colts squad just now. So, is that played into it? But Tony Ralston, hardly any appearances. It's what's Ange going to see that we haven't seen? He's come right up through the academy. I think, 4 or 5 games last season, he hit the byline against St Johnstone. Not a lot of Celtic players done that last season, but another contract. Is he? I don't think he's long term at the club, so I can't see him being a signing for the Colts, because then he's just a bloker, whoever is younger at the Colts, he's just blocking them through. Is he back up for the first team squad? Well, we've got a corner. We've not seen much of internationalists. We've supposedly made a bid for a right back. Well, that would give us 3 first team right backs. Do we need 3 first team right backs? Surely we're kind of going for 2 for every position. It just seems a weird one. We've committed some finance to this. Unclear exactly what he's going to be doing. Surely Leo Connor's got to be ahead of him in the picking for the right back position. And if we have bid for the right back, he would suggest that he's going to be the number 1. So is he a third choice right back for the first team squad? Because surely it's no good for the Colts. Surely we've got guys coming through that the idea is to develop talent to make the jump to the first team.
Absolutely, yeah. See, the thing, Lawrence, we've been talking about this for months, about the squad management, Brian, at Celtic. And it's not something that's happened overnight. It's not something that's happened since Neil Lennon's left the building and during this pre-season. It's something that's set in over a long period of time. I always remember the question in the pages in Not The View, is he a left back? Because we could never find a suitable left back at Celtic Football Club for years and years. And then all of a sudden we've got 2 in succession who held the jersey for several seasons in Izagiri and then Kieran Tierney. Since then it's been a problematic position, but not as problematic as the right back. And we know that going back to the days of Lustig, and I'm not pining for a return of Mika Lustig in the same vein as the Eric Sviatchenko rumour the other week there, we've not replaced him. It's as simple as that. We've had El Hamid in there, Toljan, Maurice Bauer, Frimpong, and now we're in a situation where we've got 2 guys in there, one who is untested at our level. I know that he played about 40 games for Tranmere last season, Leo Connor. He's an internationalist. I remember when he signed for Celtic, the Man U fans were unhappy that the club had let this promising youngster go. And at that time, speaking to someone at Celtic, they said they weren't sure, who from Frimpong and O'Connor would make the break through into the first team, because they were neck and neck in terms of their own potential. And we know what's happened with Frimpong. He's gone away for £11.5 million to German football. So we're in this situation not because of a couple of bad decisions. This is years of poor squad management, Brian. And, if we do keep him, I don't see it being an option that Ralston would be anywhere near the Colts squad. How could you get a 22-year-old who's been in and around the first team squad, albeit there's been 3 loan deals elsewhere in Scottish football, to drop from the Premiership down to the 5th tier of Scottish football? I mean, at that age, at 22, it's not going to benefit the player, although it might benefit some of the players he's playing alongside within the Colts squad. I can't see that being an option. So, if we go in and we spend big money on someone, and I'm not sure whether or not we'll get the Sporting Lisbon right back, but obviously if we're in the market at that level, that'll be your first pick. That's not going to happen within the next 28 days, I would assume. So, Brian, this is a far deeper issue, and we're focusing on the right back because there's been developments with Ralston, but there's issues like this all throughout the squad, isn't there?
It's insane, and when you look at it, even using Ralston as an example, as I say, I don't think he's going to be a first-class Celtic right back. I'm not even sure he's a great squad player. If I'm honest, I don't have anything against the boy, but I don't think he's brilliant. But in terms of the decision who signed him, so say if John Kennedy had any input, why did he not play him last year?
Yep.
If Peter Lawwell is one that said they'll give him an extension, why did they not play him instead of signing Kenny? Why did he not feature in any games? And this is an example of it's so there's no coherency with the decisions across the board. The only thing I can think of is that maybe, I know the boy O'Connor's done quite well for Tranmere, but he's been playing at centre mid, he's been playing as a holding player. Unless they decide to see him in that position, and Ralston's then the second choice right back, that could be the case maybe, but I just find that, we talk about being a big club and stuff, but there's no organisation there's no coherency rather between the decisions. They say guys like your left back, young boy Monty that come on and play the game. Why did he not play the last 6 games? See if he could save you some money. If you know you're going to be losing a bunch of players, why not play the youngsters and let them see who's got it? And if they've got it, great. If they don't, then you move them all on and you start again, because you have to start again anyway. And play the academy players. The boy Hales we spoke about, I don't think you can afford to drop him into the Colts, because there's nobody else there.
No.
So you're going to have to just say, you know what, you're a young lad, but you got a bit of presence, let's just throw you in. And again, that's probably not good for his development either, because it's different, phasing into the first team and coming in and training with the boys and getting a game every now and again until you play 5 or 6 games on the bounce. But being told you could be the first choice centre back at 17 after a season at Ross County, I mean, what are we doing here? So yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. And as I say, I try and be positive about the situation we find ourselves in, because you can't really change the past. But it's incredibly frustrating when you look at things, and it seems, I mean, look, we're 3 guys in a podcast, we're no geniuses, we're no football experts, and we can see what has to be done and why it has to be done. So why can't they?
The thing with regards to some of the players we're going to be talking about today is, as you were saying there, Brian, you do have people who are very analytical when it comes to the way that they watch their football. And then you have observers who make some great observations in relation to players and shape and the way that particular teams play and set up. So on Saturday there, we got Alan Morrison involved to speak about some of the players that Ange Postecoglou might suit and some that he may not suit when it comes into Celtic Park. And there was a few surprises, actually, I've got to say, thrown in to the mix by Alan. Some concerning players who will be playing for Celtic and those who won't. But what you'd certainly do get is you get a good balance, Brian, of the squad that he's inheriting and some of the players who, I mean, last season, and I'm going to bring up the Leigh Griffiths situation here. Last season, Leigh Griffiths obviously had, I guess, the worst season that he's had in a Celtic jersey, and potentially the worst season he's had in professional football. And when I was looking at the Ralston developments and the fact that we are activating this final year of his contract, Celtic seem to build their deals around this quite regularly. They did it with Simunovic and they decided not to activate it. And there's been other players down the last few years where we've had that extra year. So Griffiths is very much, or was in the same boat as Ralston when it came to his contract. He's still classed as a Celtic player. As I say, he's going to be speaking to Ange tomorrow. And it was my suggestion that because we're so threadbare, we should keep Leigh Griffiths. Obviously, you throw that into Twitter and it becomes an absolute minefield. And quite a few people disagreed with it. And I can see why. Because obviously, Leigh Griffiths, people reminded me, he hasn't had a good season in 5. But what I would say in his defence is that we know the well-publicised issues that he's had off the field. Right, so that's a given, and everybody appreciates that. But not last season, the season before, when we're going for 9 in a row, Lawrence Conley. And we're going neck and neck with Rangers around about Christmas time. And there is a pivotal moment in this season, prior to the lockdown in March, before the Rangers game at Ibrox, where Celtic turn it round. And I think it's safe to say that a massive part of that was the reintroduction of Leigh Griffiths into the Celtic side and the partnership that he quite clearly had, the understanding that he quite clearly had with Odsonne Edouard. Now, he signed off the last game that we were all at, the last Celtic game we were all at. He signed off with a hat-trick against St Mirren, you'll remember it at Celtic Park. And I feel that since then, last season was an anomaly for many, many Celtic players. And I'm not going to say it was an anomaly for Leigh Griffiths, but it's almost as if we're not taking any of that into account. The fact that last season, playing behind closed doors, the fact that there was no integration, or there wasn't meant to be any integration with others outside your bubble. It was a difficult period for everybody, but he wasn't being played because Neil Lennon didn't think he was fit enough. He argued the fact that he was fit enough. He was left behind in the pre-season tour of France. And what I believe is that the way the club are going at the moment, I think Leigh Griffiths will be given another contract. And it wouldn't surprise me if he was part and parcel with the starting lineup in 28 days' time for a European qualifier. Now, I don't know where you stand yourself on this one, Lawrence. Would you give him another final chance? Or is it time to do as Stephen Ray suggests and get someone younger, better and more professional? Because Stevie reckons that Griffiths has had 3 years too many. Move him on. What's your thoughts? Where are you on this one?
Listen, to get someone younger, better, more professional, we could do that for every position. You know, if they're out there and they'll come to us, that would definitely be an improvement if they're better, younger and more professional. The question is, can Celtic do that over a number of positions that we've got to cover? Griffiths, as you said, kind of turned the season before last. He's probably looking and thinking after Ajeti comes in, I'm third choice here. Let's be honest, you know, Eddie was saying, Ajeti's bought for 5 million, not to be third choice striker. So Griffiths probably thinking, I'm the third choice striker here. Obviously, bit of disagreement with, unusually a disagreement with Neil Lennon about, you know, fitness. But Lennon's saying you're not fit enough. So he's had his problems, but I think we all know he's a born goal scorer. He's brilliant at set pieces, and we're really short up front. He's on 15k a week. Do we change that and just say, well, look, you know, what are you going to get elsewhere? 5 or 6k a week in Scotland? Well, we'll pay you 7 and the rest performance related, whether it's you've got to play 20 minutes here again before you get any performance related, give him goals bonuses, something that motivates him to stay fit and score goals. If that's the issue, him being fit, I don't know what we would get. You know, the investment, if it's £8,000, it's 400,000, isn't it? If that's his basic, they put one, say. What are we going to get for 400,000 out in the market? I don't think anything as talented as Leigh Griffiths.
Well, this is a big argument. I can see both sides of the argument and the debate. Obviously, it's very difficult at times, Brian, to even voice any side of a debate on social media. It's a lot better platform, I would guess, to do so on a podcast. We've got plenty of people coming in, wading in with their opinion on it. If we are keeping Griff, then 1 year contract, 30%. Very much like what you're saying, Lawrence. The underwater cabbage salesman agrees with you. We can maybe reshape the contract to suit the club rather than to suit the player. If indeed that's possible, because I know that these contracts with a 1 year option, certainly the way that Man United used to set it up, there wouldn't be an option to renegotiate the final year of that. You wouldn't be able to give someone a reduction in wages.
Only with their agreement. So that, I think it's, you know, I'm sitting Griff down, or whoever, the director of football or the mystery man sits Griff down and says, well, look, this is what you were a 40-goal season player. Here's what you've done since then. You know, and you could go, if you get back to 40 goals this season, here's what we're going to pay you. It's going to be the equivalent of 25 grand a season. A week rather than 18. Because if Leigh Griffiths is hitting 40 goals in the season, it'd be well worth it. So it's only with Leigh's agreement. But what else is he going to get elsewhere? Maybe 5-6 grand tops in Scotland. So if we're beating that basic, it's down to his agent to advise him, going, well, you're going to get more than your basic. And here's the opportunity, if you're fit and playing and scoring goals like you know you can get up there in excess of the 18k that's already in his 1 year. Why don't you make it like 22, 23? Really load it for him performing and being fit and being on the park.
See, the thing with Griffiths is there's this kind of like blasé attitude that if he leaves Celtic, he'll either sign for Aberdeen or Hibs. I'm not sure Aberdeen or Hibs could actually structure a deal that would even give him something like 5, 6, 7 grand a week, you know, because these clubs are cutting their cloth as well, Brian. And there's a few other players, I think, that are in the same kind of boat here. Will Postecoglou breathe new life into a player like Leigh Griffiths? Will he do the same with someone like Tom Rogic? Ridiculizer reckons that Griffiths, like Rogic, has had more than enough time to prove their fitness. I find the fact the latter can't do 90 minutes to be an unacceptable disgrace for a professional footballer. What's your thoughts on players that really over the last season, or maybe even 2 or 3 seasons, like Rogic, like Griffiths, who have been on the fringes of the first team? You know, they've not come out and played your 40, 50. You look at the games that McGregor plays, and I know he's an exception to the rule, but they've not been pivotal to the Celtic side over the last couple of seasons, guys like Rogic and Griffiths. Are these the players that you think that we will get a tune-out of under Ange Postecoglou? Or is it time, Brian, to cut your losses finally with these guys? Is there too much sentimentality from people like me?
I think there's two ways of looking at it, Paul. I think if this was a regular season and we had a decent squad and you weren't needing to recruit, 12 players, then I would say Boli Griffiths time's up. But the reality is different from where we want to be. Signing Griffiths again, I think, is a kind of no-brainer. I think we have to give him a new contract. Or not a new contract, but just extend it, just because we're so short. I mean, how many free kick takers do we have in the squad now? David Turnbull. That it? But just for having his ability to set pieces, I think he's worth keeping. In terms of the attitude, the guys like him and Rogic, what I find quite interesting is, we're quite willing to say Neil Lennon didn't know what he was talking about. Neil Lennon wasn't doing things right, he was inconsistent. But except we fully believe when he says they weren't fit. Rogic, Griffiths rather, has said that he was been fit all along, he just wasn't getting picked.
Yeah.
Surely if you're managing a squad and there's a player that's getting back to fitness, you play him for the start and then until he builds his fitness up, not dropping him for 10 minutes at a time. So I find it strange that we're automatically believing that he was this fat pudding that wasn't wanting to train and didn't want to play and wasn't fit. Because I don't know if that's the case. He said it's no. So we either believe him or we believe Neil Lennon. Neil Lennon also said, to be fair, that David Turnbull wasn't fit and didn't know how to play in the Celtic team until January, which I don't believe either when you look at the impact he had. So I think you have to caveat, we're making a lot of assumptions about Leigh Griffiths, and I think we have to caveat that with how much of it is accurate. In terms of the question about Postecoglou getting a tune out of them, I think only he's going to know. I think he said there that players haven't contributed for the past few years. I think Leigh Griffiths helped save the season under Lennon when he came back to get when him and Edouard teamed up. He basically saved that season. So he had a direct impact in changing our fortunes again that season. So I'm not sure that's really fair either. I think last season was a nightmare. I think we're hearing so many different stories. It's the players' fault, they're no fit. It's Lennon's fault, he's not training them properly. We don't know. I think did he deserve a chance? Probably not. But it's like the Batman film Dark Knight. He might not be the hero we deserve, but it might be the hero we need right now. And, a striker coming off the bench, with his ability, I think we keep. And like Lawrence says, who are you going to get for the money? Because I tell you what, you're not going to get Nesbitt for £1 million. He's going to cost a fair bit more. And I think Griffiths will know he could probably stay there and be third choice striker. And I think he'd be alright with that.
When you're talking about someone like Nesbitt, he made the 26-man squad. I know he's not featured prominently, Brian, but for example, if he was to be the hero of tonight, if Scotland were to progress, then it's put him in a completely different bracket again. So there was a bid in January. Hibs were able to hold off on that bid, but they've already said they're going to be playing ball with one, potentially two of their big assets this pre-season. And you would guess that Nisbet and probably Doig would be those two players. I'm going to move it slightly to some of the comments Alan Morrison made on Saturday, which I found very interesting. I've been thinking about them. One that he did say was that Leigh Griffiths doesn't suit Postecoglou's teams, the teams that he builds and what he expects from, for example, strikers. Lawrence, he would expect Leigh Griffiths to be winning the ball back, and apparently Leigh Griffiths is the worst in the entire squad at doing that in the final third of the park. A player who would fit the bill in that respect, and although not an out-and-out striker but an offensive player, is El Yunusi, who's very good apparently at winning the ball back in these areas. But some of the other surprises were that David Turnbull probably isn't suited to Ange Postecoglou, but Barkas and potentially even Bolingoli would be suited to the way that Ange Postecoglou plays. I mean, are we at this stage, Lawrence, do you think when I put out yesterday we should give Griffiths another contract and there's a meltdown and people are basically telling you to delete your Twitter and you don't know what you're talking about and you've been on the sauce and various other substances for making such a claim? Is it about time that we realise where we are at the moment? And the fact, like Brian says, he might not be the hero we deserve, but at the moment, this moment in time, we do need to be fielding a team in 28 days' time. against Midtjylland, and you know, to have Griffiths on the bench. I'd love Griffiths to be on the bench tonight for Scotland.
Listen, I think it's time for pragmatism. You know, we'd like 2 players that all fit Ange's system and look at a cracking squad for him. We're not going to have that. You know, we're going to have some players that he's going to have to use and then build his squad through time. I didn't know Hibs had a bid for Nisbet, and was it Christmas or January?
Yeah,
so,
Sunderland were after him, weren't they?
So if they'd taken that, they wouldn't have needed a government loan. I mean, you've got to wonder about these clubs taking handouts of the government to afford multi-million-pound players, or keep players to get higher up in the league. You know, where's the ethics in this?
No, Lawrence, you raise a very good point there, and I think that when a club had an opportunity, I think to perhaps sell play for a couple of million quid, but they're taking money from the government purse, I totally agree with that. And I know Celtic didn't take any on this occasion, and it's not about taking the moral high ground, but I think we're going to be talking about the rules for guys like you and I and the rest of the nation against rules for footballers, or rules for club sides against national sides, and we will be talking about that, because it's, you know, it's at the forefront at the moment when you're looking at the Billy Gilmour debate, and we'll have a wee chat about that as well, Lawrence. So you're absolutely spot on, and I think that when it comes to football, they do seem to get a bit of a free ride a lot of the times. Why would they be taking a government loan? Which, I mean, how long have they got to pay that back, Lawrence?
Is it 20 years interest free? I mean, there is an argument if we want to see the fiscal duty that perhaps Peter Lawwell had. Well, fiscally, would it have been better for Celtic to take, what would they have got, 2.3 million interest free for 20 years? Fiscally, that would have been good. Obviously, you're taking a moral outlook on it. But, you know, if we'd taken that, we could have paid the extra money and got Ivan Toney. You know, so would that have changed their season? Probably. So, I don't know. Does it go back to state aid then? Are we getting... is the government helping some clubs and, you know, to be successful?
Well, again, we'll have a wee chat about that when we talk about Billy Gilmour and what's going to be happening tonight with regards to isolation and the way that Celtic were treated previously last season. But I mentioned Bolingoli, and again, he's one of these players, Brian, that a wee bit like Ralston a few weeks ago, any mention of certain Celtic players and there's booing and hissing all over the comment section of these videos. And Bolingoli, I think quite rightly, came in for a lot of flack for his unprofessionalism. And, you know, you look back on last season, and yeah, there was a lot of things happening around about that time, but that was one of the moments as well that really undermined the manager at that stage. And I've been critical of Neil Lennon for having a team where players think that it would be okay to do that, or acceptable, or they're going to get away with it. Or it would be acceptable for Leigh Griffiths to come back unfit for pre-season when it's not. And Bolingoli has obviously suffered in terms of his Celtic career since then. Do you think someone like that, we might even look at Bolingoli in relation to some kind of resurrection at Celtic Park? Is that a step too far?
Again, we have to approach everything with pragmatism. I would suspect the optics, I like the Bolingoli be back as first choice left back, might tip the scales against Don Mackay's reign. I think these decisions have to be motivated as well as by the playing squad, as how it looks. If we look to say, well, you know, we know you're unhappy about it, but we're playing Bolingoli. We know you're not happy about it, but we're doing this. I don't think it paints the greatest picture. I think looking back now, a year or so after, or whatever amount of time after it's happened, with some of the abuse he took, harsh, maybe. I think he was stupid, I think he was ill-informed, but it was also at a time when we weren't 100% sure what was going on with the world. And I think he got blamed for a lot of things at Celtic that we would then realise weren't really his fault. If he comes in and, you know, he becomes the best left back we've ever seen, then I think he'll be forgiven. But, you know, I think it's a very, very sticky situation to find ourselves in. There's almost no right answer, is there? I got slaughtered on Twitter for suggesting Sviatchenko could be a leader and a potential captain. Not that he should be, I just said he could be in this fantasy world. Bolingoli coming back, you can imagine the scenes. Maybe make him captain, just for the sake of it, just to see the Twitter implosion. But I think we need all the players we can get. And look, if he comes in and gets a tune out of him, we don't have to spend another 5 million on a left back. So maybe we can spend 10 million on a centre half. It may balance itself out over the course.
These are the things, again, that at the moment it's very difficult to accept. A lot of these sticky plaster type situations. But if we're going to invest in certain areas of the pitch, and this means that you give Ralston a deal at right back, Bolingoli's back in the pitch in the first team, and then we revisit it in January, then I think that's something that we need to prepare for. But how damaging do you think this could be for the beginnings of Dominic Mackay's reign? I mean, we've heard so much good about what Dominic Mackay is bringing to Celtic, and he's walked into a scenario which I guess feels like a bit of a rudderless vessel at the moment. When you're looking at players coming back like Sviatchenko, it looks like it's a stopgap. Ralston looks like a stopgap. Griffiths would feel like one as well. Bolingoli is a massive step backwards, it would feel. How damaging do you think that is going to be to the new era and the new regime, Brian?
I think it could be massive, and that's kind of my whole thinking behind it. So it's a balancing act. So I think we've agreed that we do need some sort of stopgaps in the squad. You can't have too many either. So you can justify some. You can say, look, we're getting this guy in because he's going to do a job. We know what he can do. He's a squad player. Maybe take 2 or 3 of them. You start giving too much guys like Bolingoli, guys that maybe people think they don't deserve a chance. Mm-hmm. That's a dangerous game to play with Dom Mackay, who has got off to a pretty decent start in terms of his communication. But it's the same thing. It's like you saw the absolute explosion when Gordon Strachan was mentioned as potentially being a senior role by a rag of a newspaper. And everyone jumped on it and said, oh, that's terrible, he's going to be director of football, Dom's a disaster, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, first of all, that might be nonsense, we don't know. So I think the optics of these decisions are going to be almost more impactful than the decisions themselves. Like I don't think having him in the squad is going to be that bad. Do I want it? No, if it's up to me, I'd win him. But you may have to do sort of it. But again, if you have too much, it's going to look like Dom Mackay hasn't any power. He's basically sitting in his hands doing what he's told. And it's really important he gets off to a good start as well.
Aye, without a doubt. Now, Zinko Fix comes in to say, I still think Griffiths is a better striker than Ajeti, just my opinion, before I get slaughtered. Well, Zinko Fix, you're amongst friends here. I just wouldn't air that view on Twitter because there will be a meltdown. Trust me, it happened yesterday. But you know what? I don't take it personally. Maravchik 25 comes in also to say, win 20 in a row here and nobody outside our borders even takes notice. Europe is where sporting achievement is measured. You're absolutely right, and we are talking about our first European endeavours under the new regime, and it's happening in 28 days' time. Lawrence, can you believe that a few months back I was joking that we're going to start with Ralston, Beaton, Welsh and Taylor, and we might just start with that back four?
Yeah, listen, it's taken so long to get a manager in it. It's a bit of a debacle the way that was handled. But back just briefly to Bolingoli, it's no real decision unless you've got a buyer. He's a player. It's not a decision unless you've got a buyer. So you can't go slate on Mackay and go. And if you look at it through Bolingoli's eyes, what happened? I didn't break the law. Put some football regulations. What's the punishment? Your team. What's the punishment in Scotland? Your team gets banned from the next 2 games, and you miss scopes at 5 or 6 games. Is that a consistent punishment across Scotland? So Bolingoli's maybe feeling a wee bit hard done by, maybe a letdown by Celtic, because he's going to look round about and go, well, look what happens to other players in Scotland. Mm-hmm. They don't get treated as harshly by their club or by the authorities. Yep. But, it's not a decision unless we've got a buyer for them. or we want to write off £5 million with freedom, which I can't see is doing when we're being third payer. If unless we've got a buyer, he's in the squad.
Well, listen, Lawrence, it's a great point, and you're talking about writing off transfer fees. We're kind of doing that at various stages of this squad anyway, because, I mean, the Ntcham, I don't know how much that's wrapped up in the Barkas deal, to be honest with you. Was it a 2-part payment for Barkas, which is often the case with transfer fees, and is Ntcham being used as a balance to that? I'm not too sure. But with regards to this situation, Brian, on the back of what Lawrence has just said there, if we're looking at this squad and we're saying, right, we need to get a team on the park for our first game in 28 days' time, and your option is, right, we've got Taylor who's away at the Euros, and behind him you've got Bolingoli. Like Salt's away, never to return, I'm pretty sure. And then you're basically looking at guys who will be part of the Colts squad, and guys like Ewan Otu, or people who, you're not going to be saying as a first or a second choice like Leo held at 17. As much as John Hughes rated him and likened him to Virgil van Dijk, I can't see him breaking into the Celtic first team this season. So you're looking at that saying, well, you know what, he might be the third choice, because the Celtic hierarchy will be looking at that and saying, well, the other option there is to, as you say, cut your losses on Bolingoli, and then the kind of left backs we've been involved in speculation with is like Aaron Hickey, for example, or Doig at Hibs. These guys are going to cost you £2.5-3 million, maybe even more. So, Celtic are going to be looking at that situation and saying, well, it's not ideal that Bolingoli is perhaps a second choice. But again, going back to what we're saying about the right back situation, Brian, it might just be one of those stopgaps that we're going to have to suck it up really until January and see how the season progresses and where we are financially at that stage.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of what I've been sort of saying since the Postecoglou came in. I definitely think this season is a rebuild season, and I don't want it to be. I don't think it's particularly acceptable, but I can't see us doing everything we have to do to modernise the club, because in inverted commas, and change the squad, and get all your first team players in, and play a certain way. I can't see it all getting done in one season. You're going to have to put plasters around and sort of steady the ship, and then gradually change. And I think, it's basically take your medicine. And again, this is the issue we talk about the communication, you talk about the impression of Don Mackay. He's almost going to have to come out and say, look, I get this is the most ambitious transfer window. I get there's decisions you're not happy with, but this is the course we have to steer. This is what we have to do, and we will build, we will change, but it's going to take time. Mm-hmm. And I think they've kind of implied that message, but I think now's the time to just be explicit with it and say, look, this is the situation we're in, this is where we want to be, this is how we get there, this is the roadmap. It's going to take a bit of time, but trust us to get there. And I think honesty might be the best policy in this case.
Yeah, it's never going to be done in one transfer window, that's for sure, Brian. There's an interesting point coming in from Stephen Creamer. Welcome to the show, Stephen. Love the avatar. That's how I was feeling yesterday looking at my Twitter page. How many goals did Griff score last season? Can we start getting real with the proven goal scorer comment? Well, last season, as we say, it was a stop and start one for Leigh Griffiths. But what I would say is there was a moment in December that I felt could have been a turning point, Brian. It could have been a turning point. And I watched the game with Lawrence, and it was the Scottish Cup final, which obviously was classed as the previous seasons, but it happened in real time in December. And there was a moment when Scott Brown throws himself at a ball, it's parried, Griffiths finishes it, and you think Griffiths is the hero. You think it's the return. But it wasn't to be, because obviously, they took us into a penalty shootout. And again, Griffiths scored from the penalty spot, as he did for Scotland in our qualification campaign. So, although Stephen's right in that it was a very inconsistent and there wasn't much of a return from Leigh Griffiths last season, there were moments where, had he got a run of games, and I'm going to caveat this with what Brian said earlier on, if he was fit enough, and apparently, according to Neil Lennon, he wasn't fit enough, but according to Leigh Griffiths, he was, then, the season may have been, but it's all lifts, spots and maybes. I just don't think that, we're in a position, especially when you look at the other strikers we have at our disposal at this moment in time. We know we've got Ajeti next season. We don't know if we've got Bio, because obviously there might be another loan deal for him. And we don't even know if we've got Edouard. We know that there were talks in relation to the £18 million sale of Edouard to Leicester City that appear to have broken down. He might still be a Celtic player for the beginning of the season. We've seen situations like that in the past where we're expecting a player to leave. They're still with us at the start of the season, but we're expecting it to happen very, very soon. And I think that would probably be the case with Edouard. But up top, we were so short, and even with backup, that we've had to go out and buy an 18-year-old to fill the Colts squad with a striker. We don't have striking talent up front, Lauren. So when you're looking at Griffiths in last season, he was pivotal to that Scottish Cup win, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, Leigh Griffiths has scored goals at a great rate any time he's been in the team. Whether it's Wolves or Dundee, Celtic, Hibs, anytime he gets a run, he's a goal scorer for us. We get last season what wasn't particularly good, but we've touched on it. He's had his issues. He was in and out of the team. But for sheer goal scoring talent, who do we have? If Edward leaves, who have we got left? What's in a bio? I wouldn't say that. Even, you know, he scored a few in the French second division, not a lot. Ajeti looked good when he came in. Listen, if Leigh Griffiths isn't a Postecoglou type of player that can close players down and chase players down, I don't think Ajeti, from the limited amount we've seen him, looks like a player that's going to put a shift in, chasing balls down and closing people down and pressing.
No,
under Ronnie, Griff done that. Griff put in a hell of a lot of work up front, and I know Ronnie was he was weighing him almost every day. You know, he was right on top of him, making sure his fitness was up. Maybe that's what he needs, somebody that's a bit more strict on that front. Who knows?
Well, potentially, yeah, a completely different regime, Lawrence.
It worked under Ronnie. And
yeah.
Maybe if you're Leigh Griffiths, you'll say, oh, geez, I scored 40 goals a season, Celtic went out and bought somebody to replace me. You know, when I built the belly, then I dropped the second on the bench. It's, you know, he's sure he can do it, given a chance when he's a number one striker. It can be getting fit enough and in the right place mentally to be that number one striker for us again.
Well, that remains to be seen. I would expect something this week to be announced in a similar vein, even if it was announced. I can't remember seeing it announced about Ralston. It just filtered into the tabloid press. But Bromsgrove boy, did Celtic assist in Ajeti and Barkas settling? It's a good question. I think not. Dereliction of duty again. This is something I think that goes far further back even than Ajeti and Barkas, and you know, the famous tale of Petrov coming along, not really speaking the lingo, not being on a good wage, getting a job in a kebab fan, just so that he could settle in and start to learn the lingo, and then fast forward to even Ibu Kouassi rather, again, who felt very isolated when he was at Celtic, you know, in relation to having that kind of social integration. And add all that into the fact that there's a pandemic and there's a lockdown and there's bubbles. I think, yeah, there's a lot of players that would have suffered from that. And we know that some of those players were residing in hotels, for example. That wouldn't have been easy for anyone, regardless of where you're coming in from. But would we expect, Brian, you know, the £10 million investment of Ajeti and Barkas to improve with the new regime and hopefully a new environment? I mean, we are hoping to have a new environment in relation to the pandemic next season.
Yeah, I think Barkas, certainly, he seemed to fit the bill for what Postecoglou likes and goalkeepers. When he said he likes the goalkeepers to play with the ball at their feet and you know, almost be another outfield player. Barkas apparently said he doesn't like being a goalkeeper, so that might actually fit the bill for Postecoglou. Just to go back to that comment in terms of Celtic helping the players settle, I'm not sure how much they could have done last season in the pandemic to help them settle. So I think
table tennis competitions, perhaps, Brian.
Well, they could have had parties. I mean, some clubs have parties for the players.
Some clubs get to investigate their own investigate it internally. But I think
maybe could have had songs at it as well.
Maybe what we can't do is always kick Celtic's head in, because I don't know, in that situation there's much more they could have done than they've done. Mm-hmm. So I think that's maybe circumstances over their election of duty. Ajeti, I don't see him having a future at Celtic, and I think there's a player there, but judging by everything I've heard about Postecoglou's teams, he doesn't look like the most hard working. It's like he's more of a coacher, and it doesn't seem like that's going to work. I hope I'm wrong, and he bangs in 30 goals for me, but I don't see it. Barkas, yeah. Ajeti, no.
I just don't want my final memory of Ajeti being that time where he missed the chance that you should have scored against Ross County, and he just turns around with a big grin on his face. And I was thinking, oh, cheers, buddy. As our season disintegrated in front of our eyes, Joseph Stoddart comes in with the best comment of the day, Wiggy. Not sure who he's talking about, but if there is a wig company out there that wants to sponsor the show, give us a shout, and we will discuss it with them. So we're talking about the Celtic squad at the moment. The Edouard situation is rumbling on. Lawrence, I would have expected Eddie probably to have moved on by now, but there isn't much business getting done. Do you still think that he will leave? And do you think that Brendan Rodgers will be the man who takes him down south? Or will we start the new season with Edouard? And if you do, is this not just like, a repeat of last season where we've got guys that don't want to be there?
Eddie's agent will be aware what's out there, but they'll also be aware in 6 months' time you can sign for substantially higher wages with somebody for free. So it's a call they've got to make. What gets put in front of them? There's been rumours of Arsenal, there's been rumours of Brendan Rodgers. If none of them came in, I could well see his agent saying, well, look, give it another 6 months, do the business on the park. You're going to get a huge sign-on fee because you'll be signing for free. Signs for free, and then the club approaches and they listen, here's $1 million or $2 million to free him up at the end of the season. He doesn't want to be here for the back half of the season. If he doesn't get his move that he wants this summer, I think that's it. You would think goal scorers are at premium. You think someone down south would be after him. Whether they're going to wait to see how the Euros filter out. And if Harry Kane goes for 100 million, would Spurs be interested to spend a bit of that on Edouard taking him to London?
I've thought, I don't think so, because I still think there is this view on Scottish football, and you look at obviously how some of the players performed the other night who are plying their trade down south, and I've thought about some of the clubs down south, Brian, and how part of their recruitment model probably should be to buy the best from Scotland. I mean, you look at some of the players Celtic have sold to English clubs over the last 7 or 8 seasons, and how well they've done down south. And we know who they are, from Foster to Wanyama, Van Dijk, etc., and there's probably going to be more of them. But a club like Newcastle go out and buy players for 40 million quid who end up not really repaying that transfer fee. And you think, well, why don't they just pluck the best from Scotland? I mean, is it not about time? And the other night, I guess, was another reminder that they stop looking down their noses at our game. We know the deficiencies of Scottish football, but you look at the success of, dare I say, John McGinn down south, and the fact he was playing with Hibs up here, and if he was to be sold by Villa just now, it would be an astronomical feat, and it would be the same with Kieran Tierney. I mean, the £25 million, a lot of people were saying it before, but it's looking like a snip. If he was to sign for a Man City at the moment, the transfer fee would be astronomical. So, I sometimes wonder why a club like Newcastle, for example, doesn't come in and offer £10 million or £12 million for Scottish talent. I mean, there's many players up here, I reckon, who would do a job down south. And I think Edouard would be one of them, but the club is going to be very important. I mean, I think if he was to go to some of the clubs that have been linked to Edouard, he could disappear without trace. Is that something that you think is always going to be there? The snobbery of the English game looking at the Scottish game?
Yeah, sadly, it's the perception of the Scottish game, isn't it? That it's a pub league and all this, but that's just a way of, almost building up the English league and sort of mocking us. And then if that's the narrative and everyone buys into it, then it's easy to justify, £6 million for a player that if he played for, Nottingham Forest would be paying £30 million for. I think if you look at Callum McGregor, who's no the greatest Steve with Celtic, and yet the other night against England, him along with Gilmore and McGinn ran that midfield.
Yeah.
He was one of the best players in the park. He would definitely fit in a team down there, but because it's Scotland, you go for cheap. And there's this perception as well, this arrogance that because it's the English Premier League that people will jump to it. And it's not the fact that I don't think players grow up wishing to play for Newcastle unless you're a Geordie. I don't think Chris Ayers sat at home in Norway with Newcastle posters everywhere, determined he's going to get there one day.
But he might have played Subbuteo. He might have played Subbuteo, and he always went Newcastle though, Brian.
I think maybe too young for Subbuteo, Paul, to be honest. But he'll go there for the money. Money talks. But the reality, the thing is as well, the other aspect of it, apart from the sort of arrogant side, is the fact that Hibs, even Celtic, Rangers, whoever, need the money. And if an English team says, look, we want to buy a star striker, we'll give you 10 million for him. And we say, we want 20, they go, well, we'll just go out and we'll pay 20 for somebody else that's been established. And they can afford to do that because they don't care about the money. And then I think it's going to get to a point where we're going to take it. And in regards to Edouard, I think he will go before the season starts because I think his agent will want a fee. Let's be honest about it, agents get commission. Agents don't want players to go in Boston's. They want to go for a fee. So I do think he'll go off. Yeah.
I mean, the other last word on Griffiths then, right? Because people will be shouting and screaming at the screen thinking that I'm obsessed with Leigh Griffiths. Here we go. Another one from Paul. don't see anyone else offering Griffiths 6k a week in Scotland. Now, the reason I brought this up is I totally agree with you. I think that Griffiths will actually struggle. He wouldn't struggle to find a club, but he'll struggle to find any kind of deal that's anywhere like what he's getting at Celtic at the moment. Because clubs like Aberdeen and Hibs, you know, who would be at the front of the queue to sign him, won't be able to structure that deal. I mean, Johnny Hayes went back to Aberdeen and I think it was 18 months. He agreed not to be paid for 18 months. It was, you know, a situation where he made it impossible for them not to sign him. I look at the example of someone like, and I'm not saying they're the same type of player, someone like Anthony Stokes. Now there you've got a player there who's fallen off, his career has fallen off the edge of a cliff. And he ended up going wherever he went in the world just to make whatever he wanted to make. And the standard of football he was playing was not Scottish Premier League standard or Premiership standard. And it certainly wasn't Championship standard. Players like this, I don't think, would be able to make the step up to the EPL, Griffiths included. Do you fear, Brian, that Griffiths is staring into this void similar to Anthony Stokes if he was to leave Celtic?
I don't know, just purely because I think Griff seems to be a bit of a homebody. You know, I don't think he particularly enjoyed his time in England when he was there, by all accounts. I actually think he would take a pay cut to go somewhere and play every week. I think if Hibs, his boyhood club, offered him $2,000 a week, you know, he's financially secure, he's probably doing alright for himself. I think he would take that and play there. I genuinely do. Even for a season to keep playing. I don't see him going to Azerbaijan for a couple of years for the money, if I'm honest. I think he'll stay closer to home. Tony Stokes, I think, played in Russia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Kazakhstan, wherever. He was all over the place for a few quid. Griff, I think he's got like 3 or 4 kids, isn't he? I think he likes to be close to Edinburgh, close to Glasgow. Maybe I'm making a wild assumption about the boy, but I don't see him going anywhere out with the UK, if I'm honest.
The last I heard of Stokes say was at Livingston, didn't even play a game, and then he disappeared. I don't even think he's got a club now, you know, which is shocking for a guy of his age and the undoubted talent that he had. Now,
Get him back, Paul.
What was that?
Let's get Stokes back.
Oh, come on, didn't start that rumour. Now, Lawrence, Olivier Ntcham is leaving the building. He was a player who technically was very, very gifted on his day, and you know what's coming when someone says that. Could be the best midfield player in Scotland. We didn't see it very often. When you're looking at the career of Ntcham as he goes to Greece potentially, do you think underachiever or, well, will always have Rome? What's your thoughts on the departure of Olivier Ntcham?
Listen, underachiever would suggest that, you know, he's better. Is he better than what we've seen of him? Has he ever really done it consistently for us? Maybe this is him that hit his sights. Very few players will leave us and go to something better. Ntcham seems to have an attitude problem. You know, it's when Ntcham can be borrowed.
Yeah.
You know, does that make a good player? I wouldn't have thought so. You know, you need to turn up every game, not just, you know what, fancy game of football today. I'm going to turn it on. You know, if it's true we get bid 14 million for him and knocked it back, how much have we lost? I mean, there's rumours we get bid 8-9 million for Christie in December and knocked it back when we had 3 number 10s struggling to get in the team. You know, financial mismanagement, that's over 20 million between the two of them that we've missed out in the last year. For me, Ntcham, I think he's flat to deceive. He had it in patches. But do you ever really remember seeing him running a game? Actually take a game by a stop neck and turning a game round. When Celtic are doing well, that seems to be when he turned it on. I never seen him actually pick a team up and pick his teammates up and make them better, which, you know, really says a lot about him and his attitude. You know, things are going well. Yeah. I can do it. Things aren't going well for the team. I'm not too sure I want to be here.
Well, the game that springs to my mind, and we'll be talking about this before we finish up today, Lawrence, is the first game against Rangers last season, when obviously Christie was out due to the international COVID isolation. And, you know, during that game, there was a situation where wee Welsh is devastated, Brian. He's devastated. He's sitting in the stand. His head's in his hands. and Ntcham's looking over. And I know sometimes if somebody catches you at the wrong moment, it can make you look nonplussed, but Ntcham was looking over as if to say, what are you bothered about? You know, and I think that wee image stays with me from last season from Olivier Ntcham. Time to cut your losses, move them on, and move on as a club.
Yeah, definitely. He never seemed a player to me that got it. You know, when you look at the way a lot of players sort of get being at Celtic and enjoy it and thrive on it, he never really seemed like, maybe it's just his demeanour, but he never looked like he was especially enjoying his football. I think he enjoyed working under Rodgers, as most of them seem to, but I don't ever get the impression he was particularly happy at Celtic. And I can't really, other than Rome, there's no many games stick out for me. There's no many moments stick out for me. There's no last six tackles, great passes, great goals for me. I think he'll be forgotten about.
Yeah, one of these guys who, you know, there's undoubted talent there, but how many times have we seen it at Celtic? You know, and they move on, and, you know, in a few years' time we'll hear that they're playing maybe back in France. But, you know, these are the guys that, you know, when they're coming through the ranks and in the Manchester City Academy, they're classed as an elite player. At this stage, they still think that they're an elite player. But, you know, we're 5 years down the line now. What have you achieved? As an individual, I don't mean as a collective within Celtic, because I don't think he'll achieve anything like what he has here in terms of honours. You know, he's going to go to AEK Athens. Our paths may cross again. We will see if they do. Stephen Creamer comes in to remind us McGregor shouldn't have been playing the amount of games he's been playing anyway, and I totally agree with that. You know, season on season playing 60 odd games is going to result in burnout eventually, and I think he did look pretty burnt out at certain times this season. It's been a relief to see him performing so well. I know that I can understand why Gilmour got all the plaudits against England, Brian, but McGregor for me was an unsung hero.
Excellent, really good. An example of the player that we missed last year. Really, funnily enough, like, you know, he seemed to have been a really bad season last year, but no one much of him. So it's funny how some players bad season get rid of them, but some players bad season to keep them. Now we're thinking about how we sort of judge people there. But yeah, great to see him playing, and yeah, he was excellent.
This brings us up to the international football, Lawrence, and I know you've been sitting there patiently for 57 minutes. The story broke yesterday around Billy Gilmour. He's out for tonight's game, and obviously we'd all love to see Scotland winning and qualifying for the first time ever out of the group stages of the finals. And Billy Gilmour's going to be out, and that's a shame. I reckon maybe Stuart Armstrong would be the perfect replacement, Brian. I reckon he'll probably start the game. What's your thoughts on the inconsistencies though, Lawrence? I mean, I watched with interest this morning on the news the Health Secretary talking about how he waffled his way through an interview. I've got to say, Matt Hancock, I don't know if you've seen it, watch it back. He waffled his way through the interview. He was talking about how people needed football, needed the tournament and all this kind of stuff, but then there's this strange issue in terms of consistency. So if someone is isolating and they're in a very, very tight bubble, yet they haven't been close enough to be in close contact with anyone else within the Scotland squad, Stevie Clark was asked the question. He says, that's nothing to do with me. That gets dealt with elsewhere. I'm just here to pick a team. And I can understand why he didn't want to go into that minefield. But you think back to that game they were just talking about there against Rangers. Ryan Christie was missing. And he was missing because he was playing computer games. I still call them computer games, Brian. Forgive me, I'm out of touch when it comes to gaming. Right, computer games with a couple of his buddies in the Scotland squad, Kieran Tierney and Stuart Armstrong. And at the time, he explained how that was set up. Because when you hear that, you think, oh, they're all huddled in a room on the edge of a bed playing a Sega Mega Drive. And I'm sure that's not what they're using. But that wasn't the case, was it? I mean, they were distanced, not just socially distanced, they were twice as much as they needed to be apart, like 4 metres apart. They weren't even facing each other, yet he had to isolate. What's the difference between that and table tennis, which apparently, because it's 2 metres away, it's a non-contact, you're not close enough? It's a nonsense, surely.
It's obviously a more dangerous sport than table tennis. You know, exerting yourself in table tennis, taking more air into your lungs would certainly not put you more at risk with it. I mean, Gareth Southgate seemed to touch on it, and he was a bit surprised he's got 2 players isolating. The Scottish government advisor, she was surprised by it. And the Scottish government didn't have any problem getting involved when it was Celtic did they? You know, they didn't leave it to Scottish Football Joint Response Group. They were quite happy to jump in there. They were happy to leave other teams to investigate themselves. Certainly looks strange in the face of it that 2 England players are close contacts, but no Scotland players are. Well, where did they get COVID? You know, was he room sharing with anyone with a reputation for being a COVID party animal? Who knows? It's strange all round. Listen, and obviously Steve Clark's quite right. He's going to use it to his advantage if they found a loophole that you know that they're going to exploit it. But it's interesting that the government would apply the rules more rigorously to ourselves than any other person, you know, any other club or team.
Now, the thing with this, Brian, sorry, Lawrence. Yeah, no, you're right, because it's difficult when you were so bad, which Celtic were last season. You were so bad. It's difficult to actually bring these things up because people straight away think, oh, it's a conspiracy, you're blaming COVID, etc., etc. But when you look at the facts of the situation, and you look at the Christie situation as an example, Brian, and you think, well, Celtic have been treated completely differently. And then you hear someone like Matt Hancock talking about the fact that we need this tournament, you know, for the greater good of the nation and the mood of the nation. It doesn't come into it. You know, it's one rule for them, elite sports people, and one rule for us. But not only that, it's one rule for Scotland, one rule for Celtic. We're a Celtic podcast. Of course, we're going to use the comparisons here. And there was the famous interview, or the infamous interview with Lenny, and he talks about hypocrisy, air quotes, notwithstanding. And, you know, he obviously knows a lot more than us about what was going on behind the scenes. But there are certain aspects of last season where I think Celtic were pretty harshly treated, and this is certainly one of them. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's been wildly inconsistent across the board, and I think that you know, what Lennon said in hindsight actually looks fairly accurate. I think it was hypocrisy, but the bigger concern is why Celtic haven't said anything.
Yeah.
You know, why Celtic not put their foot down and said, hold on a second. When there was other teams that had COVID breaches, but they were allowed to investigate them internally, whereas we were dragged through the mud and very publicly flogged for it. I think Aberdeen as well should be pretty unhappy at how things went. And some clubs were treated very differently in a positive way. So I think that there has to be looked into the reasons why. Why is the difference? Why is it? Is the rules changed? If the rules changed for one, why not the other? Listen, I'll be delighted if Scotland get a result tonight, and I don't wish anyone any ill harm, and I don't want the game cancelled or anything like that. But the fact is, there's been so much inconsistency, and Lawrence has said it far better than I ever could about the way things have been handled.
Listen, see, Brian, on Aberdeen got the punishment, played a game, then Celtic's breach occurred, and Aberdeen were then dragged into it. The punishment was changed for Aberdeen because it was so close to Celtic. It was actually nothing to do with Aberdeen's offence. That had already been decided that their next game went ahead.
Yeah.
That was decided. All of a sudden, Bolingoli breach. Jesus. Right, we're going to stop Celtic playing a couple of games. I better just drag Aberdeen into this. You know, what other teams have broken COVID and had games suspended? They aren't the only 2 teams in Scotland that have broken COVID. And Aberdeen's initial punishment wasn't having games suspended. You know, it's pretty clear that it was to hammer Celtic. And I found it a bit ironic. You've got Scottish Government talking about a march in George Square, an anti-Irish and anti-Catholic singing, but they're prepared to take, on the face of it, Celtic differently. We don't know why, from other clubs. Well, why are they treated differently? Leigh then came out with his accusation. The government still haven't denied it, that they changed the rules in Celtic. Well, if you know, it's the easiest thing to deny. Well, we didn't change the rules. Here they are. Brian's touched on it. Why is it left to Neil Lennon? And John Kennedy actually spoke about it as well. Where's the board? I'm pretty sure John Reid would have spoke out, Fergus McCann would have spoke out. We're met this strong board or strong CEO. Where is the statement from Celtic saying this is ridiculous? Changing rules retrospectively to punish us, treating us differently from other clubs is ridiculous. One Scotland, many cultures. How does that fit in with your slogan, treating us differently?
Yeah.
You know, and it's for the government to answer.
Well, I think Brian was right. Lawrence, you say it well, you say it best, and it's a great way to finish off the Celtic State of Mind Bulletin today. Big game tonight, Brian. There, you could tell, in the words of the famous maestro, there was a buzz about the place in the WhatsApp group when the Scotland-England game was on, and hopefully there'll be a buzz tonight. Can you see Scotland doing it?
Yeah, I see it. I think they've got it in their tank. I'll try not to put any videos of me singing the national anthem really drunk on the WhatsApp group this time, but hopefully we'll be celebrating.
No, I'm when you do that, it's a bit like my Mark Hughes tweet. You're all in, you double down, you keep it out there. You don't delete it. Do not delete it. Keep it out there. Brilliant. Conviction. I like it. Lawrence, how do you think Scotland will do tonight?
Listen, we're struggling for goal scorers, but we're at Hampden, and I'm going to go with 2-0 Scotland, and Stevie Clark will set up defensively, but we will. Yeah, I think we're going to do it. I just think the time's right for it. Clark knows how to set up his teams, but I can see for all the abuse of Dykes is taking about his quality, certainly puts in a shift for us. Shea Adams, I can see he's getting a couple of goals. Yeah,
I'm not sure if you're talking about Lyndon or Paul John there, Lawrence, but thanks anyway. And the time is definitely now. I've been Paul John Dykes. Thank you all for joining us in the comments field on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Thank you to Brian and Lawrence for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.